Yes, guys, welcome to the biggest draft rankings video of the year so far. The National Champs is over. So we've had, I guess, the most important games of the season. There is still a lot to play out with the back end of the year finals and all of that sort of stuff. But we have had an important period pass, and it's been a good time to reflect, go back over and sort of review all of those championship performances and sort of see some little details that you may have missed the first time around. You tend to get a little bit emotional when you watch the games live, particularly. You write things down and you can sort of go back and kind of collate all that data and have a bit of a look at it and see where you rank the pool overall. Now, I'm going to do here this video in a few different parts. I'm going to do 10 at a time just so I can kind of talk about them thoroughly enough. And then I'll probably drop the rankings, on Instagram so you can kind of have a look at them in a list order. But this is going to be sort of like the video and talking through my process and everything like that. A couple of little interesting things about this draft that you sort of notice over time is probably the lack of those. And if you're comparing it to last year and maybe the last few years, there tends to have been this sort of player at the top end of most of the previous drafts that's been that sort of mid-forward strike type midfielder. You think about Harley Reid, Horne-Francis, Sam Lawler. That player probably doesn't exist completely in this draft, or at least a player of that sort of high-end quality that plays that type of position doesn't really exist, which has not made the draft more difficult to judge, but I think maybe across this top end, and as it even gets a little bit deeper, most of the players have some sort of flaws, I think, to their game where you could sort of make a case that they either were or weren't pushing for that kind of number one position, if that makes any sense. So positionally, we probably don't have that archetype that we have had in other years. That just means we have to maybe weight a little bit higher different sorts of positions. And one of the things I've tried to concentrate on with this list is sort of seeing where the player can play at the top level, which role they're going to play, which position they're going to play, those sorts of things to kind of try to determine this as well. So we'll kick things off with the number one in my rankings, which is currently, it's a little bit of a change. I've had a deep think about this. I think the top four of this pool are really difficult to split. I have gone with Willem Dersma from the Gippsland Power from Vic Country, 191 centimetres. He's just a little bit too difficult to overlook with the Swiss Army knife nature to his game. His flexibility and his versatility are of the highest order. He can pretty much play on any line on the field. He can play as deep as a sort of key position type defender, a lockdown type defender, as well as being able to run off and hit you on the counter attack and be involved in transition. He can go into the midfield, shows that ability to be able to win a clearance, and his movement across the top end of this pool is really second to none. And when you kind of combine the athleticism that he has to get up and down the field, what he can do defensively with that athleticism, he's a pretty good kick. I think he's been probably unfairly criticised a little bit for his kicking. I feel there's been a narrative that he doesn't use the footy very well. I think he takes off, bites off those pretty difficult sort of kicks, which sometimes lead to maybe a poor decision and maybe he's a little bit too aggressive with the ball. But I think overall he's got a pretty good action, pretty good technique. His kicking's good and his handballing's really good as well in close. So I think maybe if there was one area of his game where you could sort of mark down a little bit, it maybe is that sort of physicality, and there's like an intensity sometimes just lacking slightly. But I think most of the time it still is there. And at the very minimum, you're getting some sort of a high-end winger, a high-end halfback flanker that can potentially hone some of those midfield skills to become one of the better sort of midfielders in the competition. And I think the ceiling for this guy at AFL level is becoming someone or somewhat of a sort of Will Day, Nasiah Wanganeen Miller. I know those players are very top end, and it sounds kind of crazy to compare him to those, but that's sort of what you're looking at as far as the athletic profile, and his quality on the ball as well can sort of, if you look back at what they were doing in their draft year, there is some similarities between those players and Willem Dersma with the way that he moves, the way that he creates and those sorts of things. And he'll be able to come into the AFL level, really fit into one of those auxiliary positions, play across halfback, play a wing, that sort of thing. And he fits in really nicely and he's easy to get into the team straight away and then to be able to kind of hone those inside skills later. So for me, it's been a tough one with this top four, but I've got Willem Dersma there at the moment. At number 2, I have Zeke Hewland, the Queenslander from the Gold Coast Academy. Now, he missed the National Championships, which has caused, I think, him to fall across a lot of people's rankings, but we can't forget what this guy did in his bottom age year, the quality. He was an All-Australian as a bottom ager last year playing for the Allies. He was one of their best players. He's a mover and shaker in the midfield. He's really the complete package when you look at these midfield options. I think it's easy to see him as this more utility type player, a halfback flanker or a winger, because he's got that sort of Errol Goulden nature with the foot skills and the way that he moves. But he does have the physicality to go inside as well. He's got that creativity around the stoppages, which really makes him amongst this draft crop the most balanced all-round midfielder, I feel. You can look at some of the other ones that maybe lack the kicking skills that Zeke Uland has, or some of the more skillful players probably lack the physicality that Zeke Uland has. So complete player. I see him going as one of the top 3 picks. As far as where he will go, obviously, because he's tied to the Gold Coast, you sort of never know with these players and where the bid is going to come, but I expect it to be in that top 3. And then at number 3, I have clearly the most fun player to watch amongst this draft crop, Dylan Patterson, also from the Gold Coast Academy. So in my top 3, we have 2 Academy-tied players, which is, it's disappointing for all the other fans out there that want to get their hands on these picks, but Dylan Patterson is an absolute pocket rocket. Now, the reason I've gone with Patterson behind, say, a Zeke Uland is just the fact that we've seen less of midfield Patterson. I think he can do it, and I think that would push him up to 2, maybe even 1 on this draft list. And the reason that I have him rated so highly overall is just that speed, man. He is explosive out of the back half of the ground at the moment. He's got a wicked step on him. He can really turn players inside out with that movement. And again, you look at those best midfielders in the comp right now that are doing that and being able to sort of open up the field with that movement. It's so important to be able to get off those dangerous kicks, to be able to open up different areas of the field. Like you saw Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller in that performance. His movement just absolutely creates headaches with the way that he can shift the field. Dylan Patterson can do that. Now, currently, similarly to Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, to be fair, in his draft year, it's kind of coming not from that midfield position, and I think that's probably why he just slides slightly here. I mean, sliding to 3 isn't really a slide, but he's just got all of the athleticism, all the skills to be able to make it at the AFL level. In that sense, he's probably the most AFL attributed player amongst this crop, but I think he fits in really nicely at 3. Again, you don't know where the bid's going to come. I expect it's going to come somewhere in the top 5 because every team would be keen to get their hands on a Dylan Patterson. At number 4, I have Cooper Duff-Tytler. Now, this one's a little bit of a surprise given that I have had him as high as number 1 in my rankings earlier in the season, but I think the national champs for me just cast just enough doubt for me to put him down a little bit. And that's mainly due to position more than anything else. I feel at the top level, when you try to project what he becomes at AFL level, does he become that absolute, number 1 ruckman that's sort of all-encompassing and can use all his skills and compete well enough in the ruck? I think there's just enough doubt to think that maybe he's more of that sort of forward ruck, which just pushes him down a little bit for me. I think still the players that you're looking at are Tom De Koning and Luke Jackson, but the guys that I've got above him, those midfielders, I think, potentially they could be a little bit more transformative for your team than Cooper Duff-Tytler, which makes him get knocked down a little bit. Still, what he can provide is amazing. The 200 centimeters, physicality, his kicking skills are unbelievable for somebody that high. His handballing's really good. So as far as a, on-the-ball creative type player, he can help you so much in transition. It's just we haven't seen maybe, a dominant ruckman or a dominant forward. So at the moment, the position is a little bit unknown for me and there's enough doubt to cast here. At number 5, this is where it starts to get juicy. Those 4 picks have pretty much been embedded in my top 4 for most of the season in some sort of order. But now we start to get a few new faces coming into the top 10 here. And this one is a very speculative pick, a very, pick looking at the future for sure. It's definitely a projection type pick. I've gone with South Australian Jevon Philippou here. Missed the National Championships, which has caused him to be lower in a lot of people's rankings. His beginning to the SANFL season was incredible with the numbers that he was pulling, the speed, the endurance, the total package. He's a really good athlete overall. Actually has a decathlon background. I think he was a national bronze medalist for decathlete, which is sort of really interesting as far as from an overall sporting background, because within the decathlon, you've got those, really high-end speed events, but you've also got the endurance events to go with it. So you've got the twitchy stuff like the long jump and the high jump and those sorts of events, and then longer distance stuff built into it. So to see what he can do with that athleticism in the AFL is going to be really exciting. He's got all the skills and the tricks to go with it too. He's got nous at the stoppage. He's got creativity. He can kick off both sides of the body, which was probably the initial thing that drew me to him watching earlier in the SANFL season. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know Matthias's brother was actually in this draft. And you saw this guy just pinging the ball off his left and right foot coming away from stoppage. He's got that burst, that pace out of stoppage. And then he can drift forward and take marks as well. Like I said with Willem Dersma, he can be that sort of hit-up man in the corridor. He can drift forward, create a mismatch, and then take a mark and kick a goal. He's hit the scoreboard and had massive amounts of disposals in pretty much all of his SANFL games this season. Do we need to see him do it at a higher level, aka the national champs? I don't know. I'm pretty comfortable with this on what I've seen. I think he clearly has AFL attributes, and even though he may take 1, 2, 3 years to sort of get into an AFL system and hone everything up and take that time to develop, I think he's going to be awesome at this level. At number 6, I have gone for South Australian again here, Sam Cumming. So there's a little bit of a flavour. This is another midfielder that, again, I talked off the top about that sort of forward mid-mix that teams have gone for recently. Sam Lawler, Harley Reid, Jason Horne-Francis, that type of player. Cumming is a little bit of that type. I think there's a little bit of that there, but there's also the ability to be more of that sort of transitional midfielder. So not necessarily with the explosive pace of some of those sorts of guys, but a guy that can get up and down, be a real threat at stoppage and in and around the contest, but also be that transitional player, that ability to go forward and be a Isaac Heaney type player in the air. Preseason, he tests top 10 in, I think it was either the standing or the running vertical, one of those ones. So he's got that, twitchy nature to him, that speed element to his game that he can really use to hurt teams. And I think if you're looking for balanced midfielders overall in this crop, there's not many that are as balanced as far as contest dominant with a little bit of outside. I think Sam Cumming sort of has that range. So really high for me. I think, again, is he going to push up into that top 4? Probably not at this stage, but I think this is about where Sam Cumming goes. Number 7, I have Daniel Annable from the Brisbane Lions Academy. So this is the third player tied to a club currently. Daniel Annable is probably the first player that comes in here for me as that first possession type player. So I rate him the highest of those first possession players. I think his technical ability with his hands is second to none in this draft. So he's able to, find that first possession and then create for other players. What he has as a little bit of a bonus on top of that is the fact that, well, firstly, his size. He's around 184 centimeters, so you expect that to sort of get up around the 185, 186 by the time he actually gets drafted. He's a very solidly built body, so I think his physicality in the contest and ability to kind of play on some of those bigger bodied mids in there as well will be really handy. If you think about a player that he sort of looks a bit like at the moment, someone like a Josh Dunkley, where he's got a little bit of that aerial ability. But the other thing that he's got as a real sort of X factor to him is his run. He just seems to be able to spread away from the contest, get involved in transition play as well, albeit the weakness that he does have is his kicking. So when he is on the ball, can sort of shank the ball a little bit. Decision-making goes down a little bit compared to his handballing as well. So I think that's the flaw, but he has been known to kind of float forward, kick goals as well from stoppage situations. So he's really crafty around that area. And I think, as I said, of all of these sort of bigger bodied first possession type midfielders, I think he's the one and he's the sort of cream of the crop. And you think about players, I mentioned Josh Dunkley, but Caleb Sarong's probably the other one that he potentially projects like. So playing that first possession type clearance animal, I think is going to be Daniel Annable's one wood at AFL level. Coming in at number 8, Sam Grill, Vic Metro Oakley Chargers, 182 centimetre midfield / sort of outside player, played a little bit of halfback in the carnival as well as in the midfield. So he's sort of got both of those elements to his game. I think at the top level for me, he projects as that sort of inside mid with fast feet. Think about a Zach Butters, somebody like that with that high end aggression, physicality, but also really good by foot and can get out of stoppage in sort of unique situations because of his movement and because of his speed. I think he's a different sort of a fast to some of the players that we've talked about. You look at someone like a Sam Cumming, who has that more sort of explosive nature to his game, where Sam Grill, a little bit skinnier, so he doesn't have so much of that power to be able to break through at this stage. But I think when he goes in, develops into the AFL, he can sort of get that to have a little bit more power to his game. I think his champs was a little bit down, and I think that's where he's kind of falling a little bit in the rankings. I probably had him slightly higher than this at one point, but I think when you project it and you look at what he can do in a development situation coming into the AFL, I think that's where he really will shine. And that speed is somewhat of a point of difference, particularly amongst this draft. Number 9, I have got Josh Lindsay from the Geelong Falcons and Vic Country. This guy is really, really, really smooth. One of the most composed, best ball users amongst this draft crop, and particularly by foot. Doing pretty much everything from half back at the moment. So we haven't really seen at that top level albeit he's done it a little bit for the Geelong Falcons, but I haven't really seen him sort of dominate a game from the midfield and using his foot skills sort of higher up the ground. And that's why I've got him in 9 and not, say, in that top 5 group at the moment, because he's had the performances. For the AFL Academy, best on ground in one of those games. He had a best on ground in the under-17s futures last year. So he likes to really turn up on those big occasions. Again, it's all sort of been as that halfback flanker. So when he's got time and space on the ball, that's when he likes to hurt you. I think clubs in that top 10 that are looking for that poise and just IQ really to come in and sort of help the team out, I think they'll look to a player like Josh Lindsay. But again, comparing him to some of the other players in this top group that can come in and play, A-grade sort of midfield roles, we probably haven't seen that from Josh Lindsay yet, and that's why he slides just slightly for me at the moment. And rounding out the top 10, I have gone for my number 2 player as a first possession player in Oliver Greaves. He's 191 centimetres, and he looks to me to be going on to play that role as like a Tom Green, big-bodied midfielder, very similar to what we saw from Josh Smiley last year. So he'll be that first possession player, that physical beast, that clearance beast at stoppages, and then sort of try to hurt teams on the spread as much as he can, but definitely does his best work around the stoppage area. I mentioned Dan Annable, who I sort of have as that top player in that role for what he projects at AFL level. Oliver Greaves, for me, is the next best, and he had a really good carnival, averaged about the 27 disposals and a goal, so he can also push forward. Albeit, I think that's going to be a lot harder for him at AFL level. I think I kind of mentioned this about Smiley last year, where the goals that he sort of kicks, bullying people with his size, are probably going to be a bit more difficult at AFL level, albeit it's good that he's shown that he can do it. And I think he does really get involved on transition as well. Target man for those guys coming out of the back half, which is really important. And if he can use that to the best of his ability, he can become a real A-grader in this role at AFL level.